welcome to the 5th chapter of Vistas. Should Wizard Hit Mommy? A strange name, isn't it? But yes, a beautiful story. A story which you're going to recollect your childhood days if you were a story lover. Story lover, you would love to hear stories, bedtime stories if you remember. Yes, this is something similar to that. It's by John Updike. John Hoyer Updike was an American novelist, poet, short story writer, art critic, and literary critic. He is known for his careful craftsmanship and realistic but subtle depiction of American, Protestant, small town, middle class life. This is what he generally depicts in his stories. He is one of the 3 writers to have won the Pulitzer Prize for fiction more than once. Now, a Pulitzer Prize, we have already heard of it in our previous stories. It is an award for an achievement, where you have online journalism, when you write in the newspapers, magazines. So this is all about that. That's the Pulitzer Prize, and he had won them more than once. Wow, a beautiful writer. So we are so fortunate to get one of his lovely stories, which we're really going to enjoy, I'm sure. So, what's the plot? The story revolves around Jack and his daughter, Joanne, short form Jo, nickname. Jack had a habit of telling his daughter, Jo, a story every evening and on Saturday afternoon naps. This time, when Jack was telling her a story about Roger, the skunk. Skunk is a very small, cat-like animal. I mean, the size of a cat rather, but if you think like a squirrel, a bushy tail like a squirrel. So that's a skunk. Jo keeps interrupting him and asks him questions whenever she feels that the things that are being told are not right. Well, the child has begun to think. So yes, she questions every time he tells her a story. Now, it's all about fiction. But how would the child believe? How can she think it's true? How does she know it's all about fiction? It's all about imagination. Later, when Jo is not satisfied with the ending of the story, she throws a tantrum. She gets angry and she gets frustrated. Dad, how is that possible? She is not ready to accept it. So now Jack finds himself in a fix, in trouble, and doesn't know how to resolve the situation. He does not know now. She's growing up. She's asking me so many questions. She's not ready to take what I'm telling her. How do I solve this problem? So let's see how it goes about. So, who are the characters of the story? Jack, father of three children, loves narrating stories. Joanne, Jo, Jack's daughter, who likes listening to stories before going to sleep, which is actually a very good habit. Claire, Jack's wife, Jo's mother, 6 months pregnant. She was expecting her 3rd child. Roger, the lead character of Jack's stories, here a skunk. Already told you what a skunk is. So yeah, let's begin with the story now. In the evenings and for Saturday naps, naps are those small little, you sleep for a smaller duration, for a short duration, those naps. Like today's, Jack told his daughter Jo a story out of his head, out of his imagination. This custom, now this routine, it was a fixed routine because she was so used to it by now, she would not sleep without that story. So this routine began when she was 2, right? Was itself now nearly 2 years old, and his head felt empty. Head felt empty. He could not think of anything. Now he had narrated stories every day to her, and he was running out of stories. He was running out of ideas. You all need to keep these phrases in mind. It's very useful when you actually, include them in your creative writing, in your writing skills. So yes, please do pay attention to the phrases that are being used here. Each new story was a slight variation of a basic tale. Now, obviously, he actually ran out of stories. So, he had one basic tale and his, stories kept roaming around that same thing. A small creature, usually named Roger. Now, Roger was the name fixed. Now, Roger would be any animal, anybody, but the name would be Roger, fixed. Roger fish, Roger squirrel, Roger chipmunk. Every time any animal that came, the name was Roger. Had some problem and went with it to the wise old owl. Now, the story was the same. Always Roger had some kind of issue and always there was a wise owl where Roger went to solve his problem. So, this was the story. This was basically the base of every story. The owl told him to go to the wizard. Wizard, that's the magician. And the wizard performed a magic spell that solved the problem, demanding in payment a number of pennies greater than the number that Roger creature had. But in the same breath, immediately directing the animal to a place where the extra pennies could be found. So every time Roger approached the wizard, with a problem, whenever he had the problem, he went there and he asked for a solution. Now the magician, the wizard, would charge him a lot of pennies, much more than Roger actually had. Now he realized that Roger does not have that many number of pennies, so he would immediately tell him also where to go and find those extra pennies. That was the case. Then Roger was so happy, he played many games with other creatures and went home to his mother just in time to hear the train whistle that brought his daddy home from Boston. He was a very playful Roger. He roamed about, he played with his friends, they played a lot of games, and then he would go back to his mother. He would go home back to his mother just when it was time for his dad to return from Boston. He could hear the train whistle and he would say, okay, now it's time for my dad. My dad is in that train. He's coming back. So I have to rush home. So he would always do that. Jack described their supper and the story was over. Then Jack described the supper. Supper is just an informal meal in the evening, generally what we take. And then the story was over. Now that is how it would go. Working his way through this scheme, through this, sequence, this scheme was especially fatiguing as in very tiring on Saturday. Why? Because Joe never fell asleep in naps anymore. And knowing this made the right seem futile. Now what happened was afternoons, Saturday afternoons, when they talk of those naps, those a little, short duration of sleep. So whenever, Jack tried telling her a story and she wouldn't really go off to sleep. Why? You will know further. She also, he felt now this custom, this ritual which I am trying on her, the story is actually going useless. It's going futile. It's actually not working now. My stories are not working enough to put her to sleep. The little girl, not so little anymore. Now, obviously, she had grown. They said, it's nearly 2 years. He's been trying this and it's not, he was literally running out of ideas. So, the little girl, not so little anymore, the bumps her feet made under the covers were halfway down the bed. Now, what they're trying to tell you is that girl was growing. When she stretched her legs, when she hit her, feet on the bed, so it would go pretty halfway down the bed. So that indicates that she was growing up. Their big double bed that they let her be in for naps and when she was sick. Now, that bed she would use when she would take her naps in the afternoon or when she was sick. Had at last arranged herself. Now, she had finally arranged herself. She had lied down and from the way her fat face deep in the pillow shone in the sunlight sifting through the drawn shades. Now, what are they trying to tell you? Just actually, when a story is being narrated like this, you should just, shut your eyes and probably listen and actually visualize the same. More than watching that on your videos, the whole story, it's better to listen to every word, meaning, explanation, and actually get a grip over the story so that you can answer your extracts very well. Alright, so coming back, she would arrange herself, she would lie down, and when her face was in the pillow, when she would lie down with her face on the pillow and she had, a little sunlight, it was sifting, as in it was coming through the windows, through the drawn shades. Now, shades means the curtains, right? So, through that, there was sunlight coming on her face, and obviously, when you have the sunlight coming on your face, you definitely cannot sleep. It did not seem fantastic that some magic would occur. He didn't even think that looking at her like this with her eyes wide open and the sunlight on her face, it was not even possible that the magic of his storytelling would work and she would go to sleep. And she would take her nap like an infant of 2. Infant as a small baby of 2. He felt, I don't think it's possible for such a thing to happen. Jack asked, who shall the story be about today? Now, obviously, because he had narrated so many stories to her that now he used to ask her, he says, okay, you tell me, now today you are in a mood to hear about what? Which character should I talk about today? Jo squeezed her eyes shut. She, squeezed her eyes shut. She just closed her eyes and smiled to be thinking. She was thinking, and she would smile and she would think like how small babies do, with all the nakras and the chakras that they do. Yes, she was this one little brat. Her eyes opened her mother's blue. Her eyes opened her mother's blue, as in she had blue eyes just like her mom, similar to her mother. So yeah, the eyes resembled her mother's. Skunk, she said firmly. Now when Jack asked his daughter, whom should I talk about today? And she says, skunk. Very firmly she stated. A new animal they must talk about. Skunks at nursery school. He says maybe at the school she has heard of this skunk, otherwise how would she ever know? So in the school she must have heard the story of a skunk, and so today she's telling me to talk about a skunk. Having a fresh hero. Now, he was a new hero. The fish was done, the chipmunk was done, all the different animals were done. Now, today, skunk was a new hero, right? The protagonist in your story. Momentarily stirred Jack to creative enthusiasm. Momentarily, for a moment, it actually shook up Jack. He became so, out of his box, he started thinking out of the box very creatively and with all enthusiasm. A lot of things started coming up his head that, okay, now this is the new hero, I should speak this. When you're talking, when you're narrating a story, the things start coming in your head. All right, he said, and with full force and with full enthusiasm, with full zeal, he started his story because, he found it very attractive, that hero. Once upon a time, in the deep dark woods, there was a tiny little creature by the name of Roger Skunk. You remember? All the characters, all the different animals in the story, whichever be the character, their name would be Roger. Right? So, Roger Skunk, and he smelled very bad. Yes, Jo said. He smelled so bad that none of the other little woodland creatures, woodland as in the jungle, creatures would play with him. Jo looked at him solemnly, very sincerely. She was looking at him and she hadn't foreseen this. She had not expected this. She had not actually come across such a thing ever before, right? So she hadn't foreseen this, and she was very, sincerely looking at her dad and listening to the story. Whenever he would go out to play, whom are we talking about? Roger Skunk. Jack continued with zest, with a lot of enthusiasm, because he had got a new hero to talk about. remembering certain humiliations of his own childhood, humiliations as in insults. Now here we are talking about Roger Skunk. He was, talking about the insults which he had faced during his childhood. And we all know why, because he smelled terribly bad. All of the other tiny animals would cry, oh, here comes Roger, stinky skunk. And he smells. Now, anything that smells bad, we say stinky, right? So, yes. And they would run away, and Roger Skunk would stand there all alone, and two little round tears would fall from his eyes. Now, the poor little soul. Now, it wasn't his fault actually. Skunks were meant to be like this. But the other creatures could not stand that smell, that real bad smell that would come from him. So, every time he went towards the jungle, wherever he wanted to play with his, the people out there, the other creatures would just run away the moment he would come, saying, oh, the stinky skunk is here. Just let's run away. Who will play with him? Nobody. So he used to be left all alone, and he would do was cry. The corners of Joe's mouth drooped down. Oh my God, the little girl started reacting to the story. She started feeling pity. She started feeling sad. The 2-year-old children are so innocent. They believe whatever you tell them. So when he said this, she was really very sad. So the corners of Joe's mouth drooped down as in they bent down. And her lower lip bent forward as he traced with a forefinger along the side of her nose the course of one of Roger Skunk's tears. Now, when she did that, she was sad, and the tears coming down the side of the nose, and with the forefinger, he quickly wipes them. Won't he see the owl? She asked in a high and faintly roughened voice. You remember that same routine where Roger would go to the owl whenever he had a problem. The owl would ask for a number of pennies, much more than Roger had. Then the owl would also tell Roger where to go and fetch, where to go and get those extra pennies. So now she knows, always the story goes like this. Now here Roger has a problem. He has a problem of bad smell. And he has a problem that he's all alone and no one is ready to play with him. So she asked her father, won't he go and see the owl? Always he goes to the owl. I mean, just as your story is always based upon, he goes to the owl and the owl always, gives the solution. And she's asking her father in a high and a faintly roughened voice. Sitting on the bed beside her, Jack felt the covers tug as her legs switched tensely. Now he could feel, she pulled the covers, she tugged as in she pulled, her legs switched tensely, means here very stiffly, her legs turned. He was pleased with this moment. Why was he pleased with this moment? He was telling her something true, something she must know and had no wish to hurry on. Now, he was happy at that point of time because he saw his daughter reacting to the story. And the moment he realized that, she's getting the story, that impact is coming on her, he did not want to hurry with the story. Why? Because he was going to convey a message through the story which she should know. As a child, she should know that. But downstairs, a chair scraped and he realized he must get down to help Claire paint the living room woodwork. Now what happened was, when he was narrating the story to his daughter, suddenly he heard the noise of a chair being dragged. Someone was pulling the chair. And he realized, he just remembered that he had to go down because Claire was painting the living room woodwork, as in the furniture. She was painting it. So he felt, oh, I need to go and help her. Remember, she was pregnant. Well, he walked along very sadly and came to a very big tree. And in the tip top of the tree was an enormous, wise old owl. Now here he's continuing with his story. He says he walked along very sadly. Who? Roger Skunk. And he came to a very big tree. And in the tip top of the tree, the highest point of the tree was an enormous, very big, very large, wise old owl. Good, she said. We all know owls are very, very wise. We say that simile, as wise as an owl. Yes, so this is how it is. Mr. Owl, Roger Skunk said, all the other little animals run away from me because I smell so bad. Now he is going and telling the owl his problem. So you do. She says, of course. The owl says, of course you do. The owl said, very, very bad. What can I do? Roger Skunk said, and he cried very hard. He was terribly hurt. So he says, what do I do about it? The wizard, Joe shouted and sat right up, and a little golden book spilled from the bed. Now she says, the magician, come on, she knew what was expected next. And she sat right up. She got up immediately. She sat straight, and a little golden book here dropped from the bed. While he was narrating the story, there was the little golden book, and that, when she got up, fell from the bed. Now, Joe, Dad's telling the story. Do you want to tell Daddy the story? He says, Joe, I am narrating the story. Are you going to tell me the story? No, you will tell me the story. Then lie down and be sleepy. He says, don't get up. Why am I narrating the story? To put you to sleep. And if you are going to sit up straight, how are you going to sleep? Why am I narrating the story? So he says, okay, fine, now go back to sleep. Her head relapsed onto the pillow, and she said, out of your head. Now, he relapsed as in returned back. She went back on the pillow with her head on the pillow, and she said, out of your head. He says, okay, fine, now speak what's in your head. Very nicely put up. Like I told you, please, go through these phrases. They're really good to use, good to speak. Well, the owl thought and thought. Now, Roger Skunk had posed his problem. So now the owl started thinking really hard, what should the skunk do? At last he said, why don't you go see the wizard? He says, okay, fine, you do one thing. Go to the magician. Go and meet the magician. Daddy, what? Now she is asking, Joanne is asking Jack. Daddy, he says, what? Are magic spells real? Now her head actually was thinking. She was listening with full concentration that she says that the magic spell, every time the wizard, actually the magician spells, are they really true? Does it really happen? Now this was a new phase just this last month, a reality phase. Now Jack was coming to that phase where Joanne started asking him questions. She started getting curious. These are all curious minds growing up. When they are very small, they have thousands of questions to ask you. And yes, you need to know the answers. When he told her spiders eat bugs, she turned to her mother and asked, do they really? Now, every time, every line that was coming to her, it was questionable. She wanted an answer for the same. And when Claire told her God was in the sky and all around them, she turned to her father and insisted with a sly yet eager smile, is he really? Now here she would actually very forcefully, with a very cunning and very curious and an eager smile, very impatient smile, she would ask her dad, is that really true? Is God everywhere around us? Is he omnipresent? They are real in stories, Jack answered curtly. Now, what would he explain? So he would say, yes, of course, they are real in stories. He would put up a little rudely, he would just, because suddenly you're caught up, suddenly you're cornered and you don't know what to answer to that child. So you feel you're so cornered. So very abruptly he said, yes, of course, in stories it's very true. That's how he told her. She had made him miss a beat in the narrative. Now, because she questioned him, that do the magicians really, that spell that they cast, does it really work? And so he literally, the narrative, the story that he was speaking, he literally, missed a beat there, because his head went off, like, he was off the track suddenly, that he had to answer Joanne's question. The owl said, "Go through the dark woods, under the apple trees, into the swamp over the creek." Now, here the owl is telling the skunk where to go and find the magician. So he says, go through the dark woods, that's the jungle, under the apple tree, into the swamp. Swamp is, you have this area of waterlogged ground, you have a lot of water everywhere, and over the creek. Over the creek is a small shallow stream. Like over that, you will have to go across that and you will find him. What's a creek? A little river. Now stream, stream is a part of it, so a little river. Over the creek, and there will be the wizard's house. Now the owl is telling the skunk, now here you go over the creek, over that little river, over the stream, and you will find the wizard's house. And that's the way Roger's skunk went. He followed those instructions and he went just there. And pretty soon he came to a little white house and he rapped on the door. He rapped as in he knocked on the door. Now he reached the little white house and he knocked. Jack rapped on the windowsill, and under the covers, Joe's tall figure clenched in an infantile thrill. Now there was suspense. There was suspense in the story. So Joanne got very, very, very interested. And so what happened when Jack rapped on the windowsill? He knocked over there on the windowsill, just like the skunk was knocking on the wizard's door. So he actually made, like, he dramatized it. And under covers, Joe's tall figure clenched, as in it grew like a tight ball. Like that she became, that wondering what next. In an infantile thrill, infantile like a childish, and thrill was the sudden feeling of excitement. Now she felt, she started getting excited about it because her dad was actually dramatizing by knocking on the windowsill. And then a tiny little old man came out with a long white beard and a pointed blue hat and said, "Hey, what's this? What you want? You smell awful." Now here, when the magician was out and he opened, and you see the description, he had a long white beard. Now that's how generally we have seen wizards, haven't we? And a pointed blue hat. And he said, "What do you want? What is it? Do you want something? But oh, you smell awful." He could, feel that stink over there. And he told the skunk, you smell awful. The wizard's voice was one of Jack's own favorite effects. Now, Jack spoke in the same tone. He brought the tone of the magician. And it was one of his favorites. He liked to do it. He liked to imitate. He liked to act out in the wizard's voice. He did it by scrunching up his face. Scrunching as in squeezing up his face and somehow whining through his eyes. Whining here meaning complaining. He was, he had those eyes full of complaints, which felt for the interval rheumy. Rheumy here means very strange, watery red. So he would literally, bring up the face. He would dramatize the face of the magician. He felt being an old man suited him. He said when he did the acting of an old man, it suited him very, very well. "I know it," Roger Skunk said. Remember, he said, "You smell awful." When the wizard had opened the door, and Roger Skunk was like, "Okay, I know all this. I already know. That's the reason. That's my problem. I'm here. And all the little animals run away from me." The enormous wise owl said, "You could help me." Now, Skunk is telling the magician that this is my problem, and the owl has asked me to come to you. "Ah, well, maybe. Come on in. Don't get too close." He says, "Okay, fine. Follow me, but don't come near me. The smell is terrible for me to take." Now, inside Joe, there were all these magic things all jumbled together. It was in a big mess, in a very untidy manner, in a big dusty heap, all in a big heap. It was a big collection because the wizard did not have any cleaning lady. Now, he went in and he found the house totally messy, very dirty. Nothing was in an organized manner. Everything was here and there and all scattered. Why? Because there was nobody to clean the house. Why? She asks. Why? Because he was a wizard and a very old man. Now Joe's asking why there was no cleaning lady and why was the house so dirty? So to that Jack replies, because he was a wizard and a very old man. So that's why his house was in a mess. Will he die? No. Now here she's asking her father, will he die, as in will the wizard die? So Jack replies, no, wizards don't die. Well, he rummaged around. He was trying to search for something in a very unsystematic manner. He rummaged around and found an old stick called a magic wand. You know what is a magic wand? Generally, they have this rod. The magicians use it to cast magic spells. So yeah, he finds an old stick which is called a magic wand apparently, and asked Roger Skunk what he wanted to smell like. He says, okay, fine. Now I'm going to remove this dirty smell of yours, but what should I replace it with? How should you smell? What do you like? Roger thought and said, roses. He says, I want to have that smell, the fragrance, the aroma of roses. I've smelled bad all these years. Now I want to, smell really nice, and, that aroma I want of a rose. Yes, good, Joe said smugly. She was happy. She said, oh yeah, that's great. Good, he said a rose. And she said, showing excessive satisfaction. She was also happy when Skunk said, okay, I want to smell like the rose. Jack fixed her with a trance-like gaze and chanted in the wizard's elderly, irritable voice. Now you remember, Jack was playing the role of the magician. He was acting it out for Joe. So what he did was, he made that situation like the wizard is going to cast his spell. He fixed her with a trance, with a very, half unconscious state like eyes, and he gazed, he gave a steady look, and he chanted, he spoke out, repeated rhythmic phrase, usually as part of a ritual. Now you say it in a very, some kind of a rhythm, some kind of a musical tone, in a very irritable voice, like as though he's going to get angry, very fast. And what does he say? Now just look, you remember he said in a very rhythmic tone. So this is how he did it. Abracadabra, hocus poo, Roger Skunk, how do you do? Roses, boses, pull and ear, Roger Skunk, you never fear. Bingo! Now this was the spell he casted. And what was the outcome? What was the result of this spell? Let's watch in part 2.